Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be covering a Photoshop alternative, and I'll be using the following two templates from one of the previous tutorials on the channel as examples throughout the process. Now, I've seen a lot of people ask, what do I use? I use Adobe Photoshop Creative Cloud. Now, that is a paid subscription-based service, and I pay around $20 a month with a student plan, but I believe it's around $50 or $60 for the entire bundle. Now, if you don't need all the other Creative Cloud's tools, you are welcome to also just go for the photography plan, and I believe the photography plan is around $10 per month. And with that, you'll get Photoshop and Lightroom. Photoshop is really all that you need though to use any other tutorials on the channel. I've also seen a lot of people ask, can I do this on mobile? I'm sure you could definitely try. I'm seeing people recommend IBIS Paint to one another. Now, I was planning to make a tutorial on that at some point, and I started trying it out, and it just was not working well for me at all. And I have yet to find really any app that would really fit the needs that you'd have to make any of the tutorials on the channel. Hey there, this is me from the future. So I will have another tutorial in the future on GIMP. Now, GIMP is definitely the closest thing you can get to Photoshop that is still free and has a lot of powerful tools that allow you to make some really amazing and complex design. From what I've seen of GIMP, it looks fantastic, and I will have it in a future video. Can't believe I forgot to mention that before I dived into all of the nonsense that you're going to see in this video. Now, before you get too far in the video, I might have mentioned it further on, but I am essentially learning alongside you, so I do recommend that you Google further for more tutorials that go into more depth about how Krita works. But as a quick summary, Krita is best for mid-tier graphic designs, as its clipping efficiency and overall design capabilities is definitely heavily focused on actual painting and art rather than GFX. Future me is out. Now, these are, keep in mind, heavily GFX-ish and shape-based. If you're doing just regular art for your banner or server banner, whatever it may be, there are definitely apps for mobile that you can free draw on. But as I've said, I have yet to find anything that will allow you to make stuff like this or like this using a mobile application. Now, in a previous video, I covered Pixlr, which required no downloads at all, and it was a pretty decent editor. You couldn't do clipping mask, or at least effectively do clipping masks with that, so you're restricted to pretty basic stuff, and of course, no download required. So if you don't have space on your computer for another application, being able to do it all online is very quick and easy. And the one I'm going to be going over today is one I actually saw recently recommended, and I was checking it out myself, and it seems to be pretty decent actually. Now, there are of course some issues when you're importing Photoshop files into it, and I have yet to figure out all the nuances, and I honestly probably won't even bother. I'm never going to use this myself, but I'll try to go over as much as I've picked up in the short time I've used it, just so you can get started with it, though I highly recommend that you then go out and find other tutorials that really go into more detail as to how to use the software. Now, what the software is called is this, Krita, I believe it's called, yes, Krita. And it pushes itself as being something for artists, and I can certainly see that, as most of the tools are definitely more relevant to quote-unquote real art. But it definitely has some elements in it that would allow you to make some GFX banners. I have a link to the website in the description below, as well as a link to both these videos, but really you can just pop into any tutorial, download the PSD, and work alongside me here. So one of the first things I have to say is I really commend the fact that I can just upload a Photoshop file right into it, and for the most part it does a pretty good job of formatting it. Now that does change when I go to the one that's more detailed. As you can see, I was already trying to play around with making this work out, but this is basically how everything rendered. None of the clipping masks were there. Everything was a jumbled mess. So I've been trying to clip it on, but as you can see, the pattern overlay is gone that I had for that, as well as numerous other factors. So before I get too far in, this is how I found clipping masks to work. Clipping masks being that thing in Photoshop where I right click on the layer, select clipping mask, and it's going to fit the shape of the layer below it. So that's really handy for things like this background texture, as it provides some extra detail just to this rectangular section. So as an example of how to create a clipping mask, we're going to go to the circle right, and you can barely see it, but it does extend out there, and you can definitely see it extends out there. So we're going to right click on it, go over to toggle locks and visibility, and toggle layer alpha inheritance. As you can see, that is now clipped on. I'm not 100% sure what's going on there, but it's fitting the need that I need it to fill, and it is locked onto that rounded rectangle in the back. Now we can do the same thing for the circle left, and all I'm doing to zoom is just scrolling with the mouse wheel. That's definitely a change from Photoshop where I had to hold, I believe it was either Control or Alt to zoom in and out. Same thing here, right click, toggle locks and visibility, and layer alpha inheritance. One thing I do love a lot about this program, and it's really minor detail that I wish Photoshop would have, is when I highlight over the thumbnail, it pops up a nice full view of exactly what that is. That would be so helpful to have in Photoshop, especially when working with smaller objects. Being able to just pop out a view of what exactly is there would be amazing. So I really commend Krita for having that functionality. Next thing we're going to go into is how to edit this right here. We're going to move on to rasterizing layers. Now in Photoshop, it was called rasterizing a layer, and that would essentially take all of these effects that are applied to it and go ahead and essentially bake it into a layer so you can edit it all without those effects continuing to apply when you make adjustments. Here, it's called flatten layer. Now make sure you always do flatten layer if you just want to edit that one layer. Otherwise, flatten image will merge everything. So here, as you can see, FX, we have some effects applied to it. So right click and go to flatten layer. As you can see, those effects are now right on the layer itself. Next, we're going to come over to this rectangular selection tool. I'm going to highlight over to there, click delete, and that now appears as if it's behind or on top, whichever it looks as it would have had in Photoshop. Let's right click and deselect. Now I'm not seeing any way of actually clipping this onto that. This all worked there because this was the very bottommost layer from my understanding. Feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. So instead, what we're going to have to do is revert to the old method of coming up and deleting all the excess. Now this is of course a very rough method, and generally I would not say this is something you should do. So I'm not quite sure how this pen tool works, so we're going to have to be using this outline selection tool. To do that, we come over here and draw around it, then click delete. Now we can reveal our character model, and we're going to be returning to this base section. So I cannot figure out for the life of me how to make the visual effects show above all this other stuff. In Photoshop, with a visual effect applied to a layer, anything you then clip onto a layer would affect the layer but not the visual effects. So in this case, we have let's go to layer style, stroke on the layer. As you are already aware from the previous model, there's a 7 pixel stroke going all the way around. But here, we have that stroke, however, it is hidden with everything being clipped onto it. So the only solution I can think of is merging everything down to that base layer, and from there, re-adding the stroke. Let me double check real quick and see if we can even have an inside stroke. So once again, I'm going to go into layer style, and this is effectively the same thing as in Photoshop, where you go to blending options, and you have all these settings right here. And we're going to go over to stroke. Let's see. Yes, we can have inside. So this will potentially work. Now we're going to merge this with the layer below. Merge layer below. Can I merge the group? Yes, I can. And let's go into layer style, stroke, inside, bring this down to 7 pixels, and as for the color, whoa, this is very interesting. Let's make this white. Is there an opacity effect on this as well? There is, look at that. Let's bring that all the way up. There is a bit of a gap there. So I believe what we can do to cover that up is let's come over to our paint tool. Now I'm going to use the eyedropper tool right here, color selector, to make sure I'm using the correct pink. Come over to my pencil tool, let's drop the size a tad. I'm going to go carefully around here. And then I will increase the size, not that big, and go over the rest of it. That side is now fixed up. Yeah, I know this is a very unorthodox method of fixing all of this. Okay, so that's mostly fixed up. Now if we review the FX, for the most part, it is as it should be. And the character model as well, she is all in her little slot as we wanted her to be. You can see the rest of it is there, but is outside the frame, so not an issue. Last part is just the text, and I fear it's going to be a similar case here. You might not even be able to do that overlay just because it's not going to show up. I don't remember why we had that there. I think it's just drop shadow, and the dupe should not be there. And for the FX, we'll go into a layer style, add a stroke, make sure it is white, click OK, bring the opacity all the way up, and the size, we'll bring that down. Once again, though, it is not showing up. And to actually save the project, would you save as and select PNG. Now, we're at the end of this tutorial, really. I've showed you how to go into layer style, and here you can change patterns and stuff, though sometimes it doesn't seem to work, and the whole clipping system is very odd and bizarre. Krita is a fairly decent tool for some of the slightly more complicated tutorials on the channel, where the first one, which was Pixlr, was great for very basic stuff, and I wouldn't use it for anything more complicated. Krita, you can take it up a little bit to a different level and work on banners that are slightly more difficult, that require clipping masks in some degree. Just keep in mind, you're going to be pretty limited in how much clipping you can do, or how much editing you can do, and really stuff at this level here, might be a bit more complicated, is where I would stop at. Thanks so much for watching this tutorial. I'm going to have another video up on screen shortly.